The sky fell on a Tuesday. I know that detail doesn't matter much when you're talking about the end of everything, but I've always been precise about dates. Old habit from the Ranger Corps. Log the time, log the coordinates, log the contact. The meteors came in waves, 3 of them, each one 8 hours apart, as if whatever threw them wanted to be absolutely certain. The first wave wiped the northern hemisphere's power grid. The second started the fires. By the time the third came down, most of us weren't watching the sky anymore. We were already underground. My name is Sam Adler. I was 41 years old when the world ended, a former surface scout for the Johannesburg Tactical Response Corps, a man who had spent 15 years navigating the worst terrain this continent could offer and coming back in one piece. I had a son named Daniel. He was 9. He liked football and tinned sardines and asking questions I couldn't answer, and when the third wave hit and the eastern tunnel mouth collapsed, he was on the wrong side of it. I heard him calling my name for about 3 minutes, then I didn't hear anything. I don't tell you that for sympathy. I tell you so you understand the kind of man who walked into the deep tunnels 8 years later. A man who had already lost the only thing worth losing. A man for whom caution had become a professional courtesy rather than a survival instinct. Troy understood that about me. He'd been my partner in the Corps before the impact, a big man from the Cape Flats with hands like welding vices and the patience of someone who had never once in his life been in a hurry to die. He found me 3 months after the collapse, living on rats and condensation in a side tunnel off level 4. He didn't say much, just sat down across from me, opened a tin of something that smelled like beef stew, and slid half of it across the tunnel floor. We'd been together ever since. The underground city, we called it the Burrow, though its official designation was Johannesburg Subterranean Refuge Complex Bravo, held about 12,000 people by the 3rd year. By the 8th year, it held about 6,000. The rest had died from disease, violence, despair, or the things in the dark. We didn't have a good name for them. The oldest survivors called them ghouls. The rangers called them shades. The children, who had been born underground and knew nothing else, called them the wearing faces, which was the most accurate description and also the one that made it hardest to sleep. They had been human once, or something close to human. The meteor impacts had done something to the microbial layers deep in the rock, changed the biological chemistry of the Earth itself, in ways that none of our surviving scientists could fully articulate. What we knew practically was this: if a body wasn't burned or destroyed within 12 hours of death, it changed. It rose. It joined the wearing faces. They weren't slow. That was the first lesson every new ranger learned. The old films, the old stories, they'd given everyone a mental picture of shambling, half-rotted things that you could outrun at a brisk walk. The wearing faces moved like hunting cats. They had lost their eyes somewhere in the transformation. The sockets were sealed over with a gray, translucent membrane that pulsed faintly when they were alert. But their hearing was extraordinary, and they could track a heartbeat through solid rock at 50 meters. They hunted in coordinated groups of 3 to 7. They communicated in a subsonic register that you felt in your molars before you heard it. And they wore the faces of the dead, not metaphorically, not as some poetic description, but literally. The skin of the face stretched and reshaped itself to mirror the last human face that had died in its proximity. We'd lost good rangers to hesitation, men who'd frozen for half a second because the thing coming at them through the dark was wearing their mother's face, or their wife's, or their son's. I had stopped freezing a long time ago. The trouble started with a man named Reyes. Reyes ran the Level 6 supply depot, which made him one of the 12 most powerful men in the Burrow. The supply depot controlled food, water filtration chemicals, medical stores, and most critically fuel for the tunnel boring machines that the Burrow used to slowly expand its livable space. Without the borers, we couldn't build new chambers. Without new chambers, the population density crept up. When the population density crept up, disease followed. Reyes understood all of this, and he had spent the better part of 3 years leveraging that understanding into personal authority. He was not a violent man exactly. He preferred economics. He had a group of about 40 men and women who worked for him, rangers and laborers both, and he paid them in surplus rations and preferred medical access and occasionally in information, the borough's most valuable currency. He called himself the depot master. Most people just called him Rays and looked at the floor when they did it. Troy and I had done work for Rays in the past. Scout runs, mostly, mapping new tunnel sections, clearing wearing-face nests before the boring teams moved in. It was dangerous work and he paid well, and we'd never had cause to refuse him. We had ground rules. We didn't hurt civilians. We didn't intimidate families. We cleared what needed to be cleared and came back with our maps and our integrity intact. The job he brought us in October of year 8 broke both those rules before it even started. He called it a retrieval. The official version was that a scouting party had gone missing in the deep eastern tunnels, level 12 and below, and he needed an experienced team to go find them and bring back whatever supplies they'd been carrying. The missing party was 7 people. Their leader was a woman named Lena Mosi, a former civil engineer who had been heading up the geological survey of a potential new expansion corridor. I knew Lena. She was sharp, careful, and not the kind of person who got lost. When Rays told me she was missing, I knew she wasn't missing. She was dead, or she was being held, or she had found something that made her dangerous to someone with a reason to keep her quiet. I said as much to Rays. He smiled the way powerful men smile when someone says something true that they wish were false. The supplies she was carrying, he said, include 3 months of filtration chemicals that the borough cannot function without. That is your only concern. And Lena. Bring her back too, if it's convenient. Troy was quiet on the walk back to our bunk room. That was never a good sign. Troy's silence was a specific instrument. It measured the distance between what a decent man wanted to do and what a surviving man had to do. He's lying, Troy said, when we were clear of Rays's people. Yes. About the chemicals or about Lena? Both, probably. The chemicals are real, so is Lena. What he's lying about is what she found. And we're going anyway. Lena's got a daughter, 8 years old, lives on level 3. I paused. About Daniel's age when? Troy said nothing to that. He picked up his pack and started checking his equipment. That was his answer. We took Rose with us because she refused not to come. Rose was 23, underground born, and the best tracker I had ever seen in a tunnel environment. She had grown up in the Ranger training program, the only child of a woman who had died of lung disease in year 4, and she had the particular self-contained quality of people who have never known safety well enough to miss it. She carried a short blade and a compressed air repeater, and she moved through the dark tunnels like water moving downhill, with no wasted motion and no hesitation. She had also been part of Lena's survey team 4 months ago, before a knee injury had taken her off active scouting. She knew the corridors they'd been mapping. She knew Lena's protocols, her patterns, the way she'd establish a rest position or a fallback route. I told her the job was dangerous and probably compromised from the start. She told me she was aware. I told her Rays might decide, after the fact, that witnesses to whatever Lena had found were inconvenient. She told me she was aware of that too, and that she'd been worried about it for 3 weeks, which was why she'd been trying to find someone willing to go into level 12, and why she was standing in our bunk room at 6 in the morning with her pack already on her back. We left at first light, or what passed for first light underground, which was the level 1 illumination strip cycling from amber to white at 600. Level 12 was a different world. The upper levels of the borough were loud with human noise, generators, voices, the clang of the boring machines working the western expansion. By level 7, the noise thinned to a hum. By level 10, you could hear your own breathing. Level 12 was where the boring machines had stopped 3 years ago, when the rock composition changed and the geological team had flagged potential instability. The corridors were raw tunnel, unlined, with the marks of the original boring heads still visible on the walls. The air was cold and carried a mineral smell, like wet slate. And there was something else in the air, something that sat in the back of your throat. Troy smelled it before I did. He stopped, raised a fist, and we all went still. "That's death," he said quietly. He was right. It was faint, but it was there, the specific sweet-sick smell of advanced decomposition. Not fresh. 3-4 days old. "Which way?" Rose asked. Troy pointed east. We moved. We found the first of Lena's team at a junction 300 meters in. One of the survey techs, a young man named Howie, whose face I recognized from the Level 3 communal mess. He'd been dead long enough to begin the change, but it hadn't completed. He was face down against the tunnel wall, and the back of his skull showed impact damage, not a wearing face attack. The skull fracture pattern was too deliberate, too specific. Someone had hit him from behind. Rose crouched beside him. She was very quiet for a moment. "He was running," she said. "Look at the boot marks. He came from the east at a sprint, hit this wall, went down." "Hit by a falling rock?" Troy asked. Rose turned the body with careful hands and showed us the wound. "No rock falls at that angle." We didn't say what we were both thinking. We kept moving. The second body was a woman named Petra, a geological technician. She was 40 meters further east, and her death was different, a wearing face attack, and a bad one. 3 of them from the wound patterns. She'd taken one down from the carbon scoring on the repeater in her still clenched fist, but the other 2 had been enough. "They got separated," Rose said. "Something drove them apart, and then the shades moved in." "Or someone drove them apart," I said. Troy looked at me. "Raise. Maybe not directly. But if someone in that survey team was working for Rays and needed Lena silenced before she could file her report, create a situation that gets people running in the dark, and then let the shades finish the job. Clean. Deniable." Rose stood up. Her face was very still. "Lena is not dead." "You don't know that." "I know Lena. She is not dead." She paused. "She had a fallback protocol. If the team was compromised, she had a position she'd established on her own, deeper in. She never told the full team the location. Only me." "You said you've been off the team for 3 months." "Yes, and she messaged me 6 days ago on the internal wire and said Rose stopped. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handwritten. She said if she didn't come back from this survey, I should give this to her daughter." I looked at the paper. I didn't open it. "Where's the fallback position?" I asked. 300 meters due east, then down a maintenance shaft to level 13. There's a natural chamber that the boring team found 2 years ago and didn't log officially. Lena was using it as a personal cache. How did Lena find out about it if it wasn't logged? She's the one who found it. She didn't log it because she'd already figured out that Rays' people were reviewing all geological survey data before it went to the council. I thought about that for a moment. "What's in the chamber?" Troy asked. Rose looked at him steadily. "I don't know exactly, but whatever Lena found, Rays didn't want the council to know about it." We heard the shades at approximately the same moment, not the clicking or the subsonic pulse, but the silence that preceded them. There is a particular quality to the silence that wearing faces create when they're hunting. Every living thing in the tunnel goes quiet before you can even consciously register why. Some animal brain signal that says, "Apex predator approaching, go still." Troy already had his repeater up. I drew my blade. The repeaters were loud, and loud in level 12 would bring every shade in the corridor running. Rose pressed herself against the tunnel wall and went still in the way that underground-born people learn to go still, which is a different stillness than what surface-born people manage. Not just physical. Something in the breath, too. They came from behind us. 3 of them, which was typical, moving in the loose triangular formation they favored. The leader was wearing a face I didn't recognize, a woman, late middle age, severe features. The other 2 were blank, which meant they hadn't fed recently enough to have adopted a face. I let the leader come to 10 meters. At 10 meters, I moved. The thing about fighting wearing faces in a tunnel is that the tunnel is actually your ally, not theirs. They rely on flanking in open space. In a narrow corridor, the triangle formation collapses to a line, and a line you can beat if you have the nerve to hold your ground until the last possible second, and trust that your body remembers what your brain is too frightened to consciously direct. My blade took the leader under the jaw at a forward angle. One motion, hip to shoulder, no hesitation. The body dropped and I was already moving past it. Troy had the second one. He'd closed to grappling distance, which was insane, and also the only way to deal with a shade when you couldn't use a repeater. And I heard the specific crunch of cartilage that meant he'd used the steel-toed boots, the head stamp move he'd developed in year 2 and refined into something almost elegant. The third one had Rose. It had gotten past us somehow, not between us because that was impossible, but behind us, which meant there had been a fourth one we hadn't detected, using the others as a distraction. They did that sometimes. The tactical evolution of the wearing faces was one of the things that kept the older rangers awake at night. They were getting smarter. Not individually, each one was a creature of pure instinct and appetite, but collectively in the way that a hive adapts. Rose was not panicking. That was the first thing I noted. She had the shade's arm controlled with both hands, keeping its mouth from her throat, and she was working the problem with the focused attention of someone solving an engineering question rather than fighting for her life. But she couldn't reach her blade, and she was losing ground. I didn't use the blade on this one. I used my elbow, a horizontal strike to the temporal region, and I did it twice because the first time wasn't enough, and then it was enough. We stood in the tunnel for a moment, breathing. 4, Troy said. 4, I agreed. They sent a flanker. Yes. He looked at the bodies. That's new. That's new, I said. Rose retrieved her blade and looked at the shade that had been on her. It was wearing a young man's face. She looked at it for a long time without expression, and then she stepped over it and kept walking east. We found the maintenance shaft where she said it would be. The shaft dropped 12 meters to level 13, and the chamber beyond it was exactly what Lena had said, a natural formation, wider than any bored tunnel, with a high vaulted ceiling and a flat floor of compressed mineral sediment. Lena had been living in it for 4 days. She was thinner than I remembered, and her left arm was splinted with tunnel piping and strips of insulation tape. She had a small chemical heater, 2 days of rations, and the kind of eyes that people get when they've been alone in the dark for a long time with a lot to think about. When she saw Rose, she started crying without making any sound. Just tears, her face otherwise completely still. The underground way of grief learned early, practiced until it was reflex. Rose held her for a moment. Then Lena pulled back and looked at us. Ray's sent you, she said. It wasn't a question. Ray's hired us, I said. That's different. Is it? Tell me what you found, I said. Then we'll see how different it is. What Lena had found was air. That sounds absurd, but hear me out. The Geological Survey had been looking for expansion corridors, new tunnel routes that could be bored out to add living space. What Lena's team had found instead was a series of natural fissures in the rock at level 13 and below, fissures that connected to a much larger cavity system, cave networks that extended for kilometers in every direction, naturally ventilated, with a carbon dioxide level low enough to support human respiration, and a temperature profile that suggested proximity to a geothermal heat source. In practical terms, a natural underground city many times larger than anything the boring teams had built, with clean air, with heat, with enough space to house the entire burrow population 10 times over. The other thing Lena had found was the source of the wearing faces. Not their origin, she hadn't solved that mystery, but the source of why they were in the tunnels in such numbers. The fissures that connected to the Great Cave System also connected to a much deeper geological formation, something that the pre-impact surveys had classified as an unusual mineral deposit. Lena's instruments had told her something different. That deep formation was the Wearing Face's breeding ground, the place where the changed bodies went to not to rest exactly, but to aggregate, where the hive logic that was slowly replacing the old instincts was concentrated. The cave network sat between humanity and that breeding ground. Whoever controlled the cave network controlled the chokepoint. Ray's knows about the cave system, Lena said. He's known for 6 months. My predecessor on the survey team found the fissure access and reported it to the council through Ray's, as required. The report never reached the council. I found the original filed report in Ray's depot records when I was auditing supply manifests. He'd classified it under a routine geological code and buried it. Why? Troy asked. Because the cave system changes everything. Right now, Ray's controls the bottleneck: food, water, fuel, filtration. In the cave system, there are natural aquifers. There are thermal vents that could power generation equipment. There are food-growing conditions far superior to what we have on the upper levels. She paused. If the council knows about it, the borough moves. 1,200 families. Ray's position evaporates. He's the depot master of a depot that no longer matters. I sat with that for a while. He sent us down here to bring back the filtration chemicals, I said. There are no filtration chemicals, Lena said. The supply manifest he showed you doesn't exist. He sent you down here to find me, confirm I'm dead, and come back with nothing. And if we came back with you instead? Lena looked at me with the flat, tired eyes of someone who had already worked through every angle of a problem and found all of them sharp. Then he has a choice, she said. He can suppress the report again, which gets harder with more witnesses, or he can arrange for the witnesses to not come back. There's a third option, Rose said quietly. We all looked at her. We don't go back to Ray's, Rose said. We go to the council. The council, Troy said. The same council that's been running through Ray's depot for 8 years and apparently hasn't noticed that half their supply reports are fabricated. Some of them are compromised, Lena said. Not all. Councillor Ndilovu has been asking questions for 2 years. She hasn't been able to get traction because she didn't have evidence. Lena reached into her pack and produced a hardened case, the kind used for sensitive instruments. She opened it. Inside were 4 data chips, each one sealed in a protective sleeve. She has evidence now. I thought about Ray's. I thought about the 40 people who worked for him, some of whom were dangerous and none of whom were stupid. I thought about the Wearing Faces in the tunnels behind us, and the flanker maneuver that hadn't existed 6 months ago, and the cave network below us with its chokepoint between humanity and the hive ground. I thought about Daniel for about 2 seconds, which was as long as I usually allowed myself. How long to get to level 1 from here? I asked Rose. Standard route 5 hours. The route I have in mind about 3. And Ray's people will be watching the standard approaches. Yes. What's the route you have in mind? She told me. The cave system. The natural fissures that Lena had found connected to level 13, not just from the east but from the north. And the northern branch, according to Lena's survey maps, tracked upward through a series of natural chimneys that emerged into a maintenance crawlspace on level 4. Level 4 was garment production and water reclamation. Ray's people were thin on the ground there, and Councillor Ndilovu's office was 40 meters from the level 4 access point. We'd be going through the cave system, Troy said. The system that sits between us and the Wearing Face breeding ground. Yes, Rose said. In the dark. Yes. Have you been through it? Part of it, the northern branch for about 200 meters. Part of it, Troy repeated. We can do it, Rose said. Not with bravado, with the straightforward certainty of someone who has made a practical assessment and arrived at a number. Lena looked at her arm. I can move. I know, Rose said. I know you can. We went down through the fissure. The cave system was extraordinary. I want to be precise about that, because the word gets used too easily. I've spent 8 years underground and I thought I'd lost the capacity to be surprised by what was down there. But the natural chambers that opened up below level 13, the scale of them, the height of the ceilings, the way the thermal vents had created slow columns of warm air that moved through the darkness like breath, they were extraordinary. In the light of our helmet lamps, the mineral walls were streaked with color, ochres and deep blues and a pale green that might have been algae or might have been something that hadn't existed before the impacts. The air was good. Troy kept checking his meter and kept getting the same reading, breathable, consistently, across every chamber we passed through. This could hold everyone, he said softly at one point. That's what I said, Lena replied. We were 2 kilometers into the northern branch when we heard the hive. Not the wearing faces themselves. The sound they make when they're not hunting, not the click-in pulse of coordinated attack, but a lower, slower register, something between a vibration and a tone, that came through the rock itself rather than through the air. We felt it in our feet before we heard it, a deep harmonic that had no human analog I could name. The breeding ground is below us here, Lena said, consulting her survey map. We're directly above the main aggregate zone. How far below? I asked. 40–50 meters. The rock between us is solid. We're not in danger from below. But from the sides? Troy asked. Lena checked the map again, then she stopped. There's a branch passage, she said, 40 meters ahead on the eastern wall. It wasn't on my original survey, it might have opened up in the last few weeks. The rock formation down here is. I see it, Rose said. She was right. In the beam of her lamp 20 meters ahead, there was a dark opening in the eastern wall. Recent from the look of the broken edge, raw rock, pale where it had fractured, not old. And from it came the hive tone, much stronger now, and something else, movement. Back, I said. We backed. Not running. Running would create noise and vibration that would draw them faster. Walking, smoothly, the way experienced tunnel fighters walk when the situation calls for quiet over speed. They came through the breach in a group of 7. 7 is the largest coordinated group they form. I knew that from Ranger briefings, from the tactical reports that filtered up through the Corps over the years. 7 is some threshold in their collective logic. Beyond 7, the group loses coherence, fractures into smaller hunting units. 7 is the most dangerous number because it's the most organized. They came through and stopped. That was not standard. The wearing faces did not stop after a breach. They poured through and they spread, because their hearing triangulated prey position instantly and spread maximized coverage. These 7 came through and formed a line and stopped. I held perfectly still. Beside me, I felt Troy and Rose do the same. Lena was behind us against the wall. The shades had no eyes. The membranes over their sockets pulsed slowly in the glow of our lamps, which I realized, with a cold drop in my stomach, we had not turned off. Light didn't bother them. Darkness didn't help us. We'd always been told that light was neutral, that they hunted by sound and vibration, that it made no difference. But these 7 were reacting to our lamps. Not exactly, not with the light itself, but their heads were oriented precisely toward the light sources, and as I watched, the 2 outermost ones shifted their position slightly, not toward us, but to the sides, flanking. The same formation that the 4 in the upper tunnel had been running. They were using the light to locate us. Not because they could see it, because they could hear it. The chemical reaction in the lamp cells produced a faint electromagnetic signature, and they were evolving in real time. 8 years of accelerated adaptation in a species that had never existed before, the capacity to detect it. I reached up and turned off my lamp. The darkness was absolute. In absolute darkness, In a cave system, I had walked for approximately 90 minutes, with 4 people depending on me and 7 wearing faces 6 meters ahead. There was a specific quality to the moment that I can only describe as clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when everything irrelevant has been removed. No ambiguity, no competing priorities, just the problem and the solution and the body's memory of everything it had ever learned. I heard Troy's lamp click off to my left, Rose's a moment later, Lena's. Silence. The hive tone was still coming through the floor. The 7 shades were still there. I could hear the subtle shift of their weight, the click of their nails on rock, the slow subsonic pulse of coordinated cognition. They could hear us breathing. At normal respiration rates, they could locate us within a meter. I knew this. Every ranger knew this. The standard counter was to slow the breath, not hold it, which created a spike when you finally exhaled, but slow it, lengthen the cycle, reduce the volume below the threshold of their discrimination. 2 breaths a minute if you could manage it. It was something that took months to learn. Rose had learned it underground from birth. I heard her breath slow beside me, patient as a tide. I heard the shades shifting. They were still in their line, still processing. They could hear us, but the new information, the lamps going dark simultaneously, had disrupted the coordination. The flankers had stopped. The hive logic was recalculating. I had perhaps 30 seconds before they resolved the problem. I thought about the tunnel behind me. I had walked 90 minutes from the level 13 access point. 40 meters behind us, there was a natural pillar, a column of stone rising from the floor to the ceiling. Beyond the pillar, the passage narrowed to about 1.5 meters, wide enough for 1 person at a time. If I could get the group past the pillar, the 7 became a line, and a line became manageable. The problem was that getting to the pillar meant moving past the shades, or drawing them away. I thought about Daniel again, 9 years old, tinned sardines, questions I couldn't answer. I threw my lamp. Not lit, dark, dead, but massive enough to hit the far wall with a crack that the shades couldn't ignore. Every head in the line snapped toward the impact point. Move, I said at normal volume, because normal volume was fine now that I'd already given them a location, and running quietly was a contradiction in terms. Pillar, 40 back, go. Rose went first. She'd been counting steps since we turned the lamps off. I knew she had, because that was the kind of person she was. Lena went second, faster than I expected, one arm splinted and her face absolutely focused. Troy went third and I went last, and behind us I heard the shades reorganize with a speed that was no longer surprising but was still frightening. We made the pillar. The natural narrowing of the passage forced exactly what I'd counted on. The first shade came through at full sprint, and Troy took it with a blade, 2-handed, no hesitation. The second came through half a second behind, and I took that one. The third stopped at the narrowing stopped, which was still new, still wrong, still that collective intelligence making decisions that individual shades didn't make, and the fourth and fifth banked off to either side of the passage mouth in the darkness. 6 meters, 4 shades and 6 meters of dark tunnel, and whatever was happening on the sides I couldn't see or hear. Rose, I said. I'm here. Lena. Here. Troy. Present. Keep going, don't stop, I'll hold here. A pause. Sam, Rose said. Keep going, I paused. Ndilavu, level 4, give her everything. Another pause. Sam, Troy said. Go. I heard them moving. I heard them get smaller in the darkness. I stood in the bottleneck passage with my blade and waited for the shades to decide what to do. What they did was unexpected. They didn't rush. The remaining 4 organized in the darkness with the subsonic hive pulse, and what they settled on was a patience I hadn't seen before. One of them probed the narrowing slowly, the way you'd probe a tripwire, not rushing, testing, learning the geometry of the obstacle before committing to it. I had fought wearing faces for 8 years. I had never seen one probe an obstacle. I held the blade and waited. The probe came forward another meter. I could hear its breath, the specific rhythm of something that had once been human and retained the architecture of human respiration, but none of its content. The membrane over its eyes pulsed with a slow light I could just barely see in the total dark. The bioluminescence that only happened when they were in a state of high cognition, which the Rangers had first reported 2 years ago, and which most of the council had dismissed as hallucination or overwork. It wasn't hallucination. I let it come to 4 meters. Then I made a sound. Not the sound of a human in distress, not the involuntary sounds that drew them in hunting formation. A specific sound, a low sustained note that I had read about in a pre-impact research paper that Lena had found in a cave cache of salvaged academic journals. A paper written by a xenobiologist working on a theory that the hive intelligence of the wearing faces used a specific frequency band for coordination signaling, and that disrupting that band might, hypothetically, in ways that had never been tested because the researcher had died before the second wave, cause a disruption in group coherence. I couldn't reproduce the exact frequency. I had a human voice, not a laboratory signal generator, but I could approximate it, and I had been thinking about that paper for 6 months, and I had been practicing the approximation alone in my bunk room because I was the kind of man who, when he had nothing left to lose, found it easier to prepare for the worst than to hope for anything better. The probe stopped. The hive pulse stuttered. Not silence, but a disruption in the rhythm, the equivalent of a power fluctuation in a running generator. The pulse skipped a beat, recovered, skipped again. I kept the note. I'm not going to tell you it drove them off. It didn't. But it bought me 40 seconds, and 40 seconds was enough for me to back through the narrowing, maintain the note for another 10 meters, then break into a run in the absolute dark, counting on muscle memory and footfall pattern, and the human being's apparently unique capacity to build a spatial map of a tunnel from sound and vibration, and the animal part of the brain that never went fully quiet. I ran, I counted. I found the branch that led to the natural chimney system. I went up. 3 hours later, I was on level 4. Troy and Rose and Lena were already there. Troy had a cut across his forearm that he'd wrapped in a strip of his own shirt, and Lena's splint had been resecured, and Rose was sitting on the floor with her back against the passage wall and her eyes closed, and she looked like a person who had stopped moving exactly as far from the finish line as the distance she decided she was allowed to stop. She opened her eyes when she heard me. She didn't say anything, neither did I. Counselor Ndilavu's office was exactly 40 meters away. What happened after that is the kind of thing that takes much longer to unfold than to describe. The council meeting was called within 2 hours of Lena presenting the data chips. The evidence against Reyes was specific, documented, and inarguable: falsified reports, suppressed geological surveys, misappropriated supplies, the 6 months of deliberate concealment of a resource that could have doubled the burrow's survivability before the winter die-offs of year 7 had taken 1,100 lives. His people were detailed to barracks within the hour. Reyes himself was arrested in the depot, which he had apparently not left, either from stubbornness or from some confidence that the chain of evidence couldn't reach him. The confidence was misplaced. The expansion plan, the real one, based on Lena's survey data, based on the cave system and the natural chambers and the geothermal heat and the clean air that moved through the darkness in slow, warm columns, was presented to the council 4 days later. It passed unanimously. The first boring team reached the level 13 fissure access in 3 weeks. There is a great deal more that happened after that. The cave system contained things we didn't expect and threats we hadn't mapped, and a section of natural passage that ran directly adjacent to the wearing face breeding ground that required 4 months of careful defensive work before we could safely route foot traffic past it. The hive intelligence continued to evolve. The flanker maneuver became standard. The obstacle probing behavior spread to shade groups in other tunnel sectors within 2 months, which told us something about how information moved through the collective that we didn't fully understand and still don't. But the choke point was ours. We held it. We built a wall across the primary passage between the breeding ground and the upper cave network. Not a passive wall, not a door, but an active defensive line manned in rotating shifts by the strongest ranger crews we had, using everything that 8 years of living underground had taught us about how to fight things in the dark. The wearing faces never broke through. I want to be honest about what that cost. 19 rangers died in the 14 months of securing the cave network. 3 of them were people I had worked with since year 1, people who had made the underground habitable through 8 years of the kind of quiet, relentless, unrecorded courage that doesn't get documented in council reports. Troy was in the infirmary for 2 months after a breach in month 6, and there were 3 days in there where the medical team wasn't sure he was going to keep both legs. He kept both legs. He walks with a cane now, which he regards as an aesthetic problem rather than a functional one, and he is still the first person through any door I'd choose to go through. Rose runs the Northern Sector Defensive Command. She is 24 years old, and the wearing face casualty rate in her sector is the lowest in the cave network, because she has studied the hive intelligence with the same focused attention she brings to everything, and she has written 40 pages of operational notes that have since become the foundation of Burrow Ranger doctrine. She doesn't sleep enough. She drinks too much of the terrible fermented grain product that someone in level 5 started making in year 6. These are concerns that I raise with her periodically, and that she acknowledges with the polite attention of someone who has more important problems. Lena Mosi is the head of the Expansion Authority. Her daughter is 9 years old now. She is quiet and observant, and she asks questions that nobody can answer, and she has her mother's eyes. I still go into the tunnels. Not as often as before. My role is largely administrative now, coordinating scout deployments, reviewing tactical reports, attending the council briefings that have multiplied like rodents in a grain store since the expansion began. It is useful work, and I do it carefully, and I don't particularly enjoy it. But twice a month, I take a lamp and go down to level 13, to the Fisher access, and I spend a few hours in the cave network alone. Not the defended sectors further in, into the deeper chambers where the mineral walls are streaked with color and the warm air moves in slow columns and the scale of the space makes you feel, for a moment, like the earth itself is still on your side. I'm not sure why I keep going. I've thought about it. I think it's because Daniel never got to see anything like that. He died in a collapsed tunnel in the dark with no clean air and no warmth and nothing beautiful within reach. I can't fix that. There's no mechanism for that kind of repair. But I can be in a place that is beautiful and large and improbably full of breathable air, and I can think of him there. And that is a different thing from thinking of him in a bunk room or a council chamber or a defensive trench. I'm not sure it helps. I'm not sure it has to help. I turn my lamp off sometimes in the deepest chamber, sit in the absolute dark, listen to the thermal air move. The hive tone is always there deep below, a long way down, growing slowly the way things grow when you can't stop them, only redirect them. But above it, if you're quiet enough and your breathing is slow enough and you've had enough years of practice sitting in the dark with everything you've lost, above it, you can hear the caves breathing. Warm, deep, patient. We're still here. That's the whole of it, really. Everything else is details. We went underground because the sky broke, and we lost people to the dark, and we nearly lost ourselves to the men who decided that survival was a resource like any other to be controlled and metered out and leveraged into power. We survived the shades, and we survived rays, and we survived 8 years of the kind of grinding attrition that takes most of what a person is made of and returns very little. We're still here, 12,000 of us more now, with the births that the new space and the better air and the improved nutrition have started to bring. The cave network is lit now in the upper reaches, illumination strips running along the vaulted ceilings. There are children down there who have never known the cramped, airless levels of the old burrow, who have grown up with high ceilings and clean air and the distant warm rumble of the geothermal generators. The wearing faces are still out there. They're still evolving. Last month's tactical report noted a new behavior, a retreat pattern, a coordinated withdrawal in the face of superior firepower that none of the early models predicted. They are learning what we are, learning that we hold the chokepoint and that breaching it costs more than they can afford. That's a different thing from winning. I'm careful about that word, but it's something. I sat in the deep chamber last Tuesday. Lamp off, dark complete. The hive tone deep below, the cave air warm above, and somewhere in between, the quiet fact of human persistence. Not heroism, not destiny, not the inevitable triumph of an exceptional species, but just the stubbornness of people who had already lost the most important things and therefore had no particular reason to stop. I thought about Daniel. I turned the lamp back on. I walked home. The council asked me once, early in the expansion, month 2, when the defensive line was still being established and every other day brought a new crisis. They asked me what I thought the wearing faces were at the deepest level. Not biologically, philosophically. Whether I thought they were something that could be communicated with or negotiated with, or whether they were simply a pressure to be managed, like rock or water or cold. I said I didn't know. I still don't know. But I've spent enough time in those tunnels, enough hours sitting in the dark with the hive tone coming through the floor and the cave air warm above me, to have formed an opinion. It's not a scientific opinion. It's not even a particularly well-reasoned one. It's just the opinion of a man who spent 8 years watching what happened when things adapted to the underground and what happened when people tried to. The wearing faces are what this world made when it ran its experiment on the dead. We are what this world made when it ran its experiment on the living. The experiment isn't finished. It might not finish in my lifetime, or in the lifetime of anyone currently drawing breath in the burrow. The shades are adapting. We are adapting. The cave network is large and the breeding ground is deep, and the distance between the two is something we hold by effort and intention, and the accumulated discipline of people who have decided, for whatever private reason, that today is not the day. I don't hold it for abstract reasons. I hold it because Lena's daughter has her mother's eyes and asks questions nobody can answer, and she deserves the time to find some of the answers herself. I hold it because Troy walks with a cane through a corridor that is lit and warm and high-ceilinged, and he looks at that corridor with the same expression a man gets when he has bet everything on a single outcome, and the outcome came in. I hold it because Rose is 24 years old and the best person I have ever seen in a tunnel, and the worn-face casualty reports from her sector read like a lesson in what a human being becomes when they apply themselves to a problem with the kind of focused, relentless intelligence that the cave dark demands. And I hold it because the morning after we brought Lena out of level 13, before the council meeting, before the arrests, before any of the machinery of consequence had started to turn, Rose found me in the corridor outside the infirmary and handed me a folded piece of paper. Lena's letter, the one she'd written for her daughter. She wants you to have it, Rose said. She wrote a new one for Amara. I didn't open it then. I carried it for 2 weeks before I read it. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It wasn't a confession or a record or a document of anything that had happened. It was just a woman, alone in the dark with a broken arm and 4 days of rations, and the full knowledge that she might not make it back, writing down the things she believed about the world she was living in, about what it meant to keep going, about the cave system below her and the air in it, and the possibility it represented, not the certainty, just the possibility that the world hadn't finished with human beings yet. The last line, we are still capable of surprise. I folded the paper and put it in my breast pocket, and I have carried it every day since. Some mornings that's enough, some mornings it's just paper. Either way, I get up. Either way, the lamp goes on. In the second year of the expansion, we lost a ranger named Caboose in the northern sector breach of month 9. Caboose had been underground since year 1, an ex-mine safety inspector from the Witwatersrand who had transferred his entire professional knowledge of underground hazard management into the business of keeping people alive in the tunnels. He was 53 years old, methodical, unimpressible, and quietly funny in the way of people who have looked at enough genuinely terrible situations that ordinary frustrations had lost their power to disturb him. He kept meticulous notes. He drank his coffee black and too hot. He had a habit of tapping the tunnel walls as he walked, not from nerves, but from the old mining reflex of listening to what the rock was telling you. He died in the month 9 breach because the Wearing Faces had found a new entry point, a natural fissure below the defensive line that the survey hadn't flagged, and the group that came through it was 8 individuals, not 7, and the tactical model broke at 8 in ways it didn't break at 7. Caboose held the access shaft long enough for the 2 rangers behind him to pull back and seal the secondary gate. He was the kind of man who would have done the math and known exactly how much time the 2 behind him needed, and made sure they had it. I wrote his name on the wall of my office beside 11 others. I'm telling you this because the story I've described, the cave network, the chokepoint, the evidence that broke Ray's, the defensive line we built and held, it has the shape and the telling of something that worked out. And it did work out. But I don't want you to think that means the losses were small or that the people who didn't make it through were a tolerable cost that we processed cleanly and moved past. You don't move past them. You add their names to the wall and you carry them and the weight accumulates, and after enough years you are partly made of other people's names. And that is not a comfortable thing, but it is an honest thing, and it is, I think, one of the specifically human things, the carrying of the specific dead, the refusal to let them become statistics. The Wearing Faces don't mourn their dead. I've observed them long enough now to say that with reasonable confidence. When one of their group is killed, the others don't pause, don't respond to the body, don't alter their behavior in any way that looks like acknowledgement. The hive intelligence absorbs the loss and redistributes. There is no friction in their adaptation, no cost. We carry every one of ours. We grieve badly and we function poorly in the immediate aftermath, and we make tactical mistakes in the first weeks after a significant loss because human beings are not designed for clean adaptation. We are designed for attachment, which is a vulnerability, which is also the only reason we built the defensive line and held it, because the people who build and hold lines are almost always doing it for someone specific, not for an abstract principle. Caboose held that access shaft for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The 2 rangers he saved were a woman named Petra Jr., no relation to the Petra we found in the deep tunnel, and a 19-year-old kid from level 8 named Bram who had been in the Corps for 4 months and who is now, 3 years later, one of the best section leaders in Rose's Northern Command. Bram named his first defensive position after Caboose. The Wearing Faces haven't breached that position in 22 months. I don't think that's coincidence. I think the name means something to the people who hold it. I think they stand in that position and they feel the specific weight of a specific man, and it makes them better at standing. That's the thing the hive intelligence can't replicate. Not the tactics. They're learning the tactics faster than I'm comfortable with. Not the endurance. They don't get tired. Not the coordination. Theirs is more fluid than ours in the moment, less fragile to disruption in the individual. But the dead. They can't use their dead. We can. We do. Every name on every wall in every defensive position in the cave network is a load-bearing element of the structure. Remove them and the thing gets lighter and also less stable. The grief is the architecture. I learned that from Daniel, I think. From 8 years of carrying him into places he never got to see, and finding that the carrying made me steadier rather than less so. It took a long time to understand that. It seemed backward. It seemed like grief should be a subtraction, a resource drain, something a functionally rational person would eventually discharge or compartmentalize below operational threshold. It isn't, it's ballast, the difference between a boat that rides stable and one that capsizes in weather. The Burroughs' first surface expedition goes out in the spring, 6 years after the last attempted surface contact, which ended badly and taught us things we'd rather not have learned. The surface is still hostile. The post-impact atmosphere isn't what it was. The UV levels fluctuate unpredictably, and there are indications that the wearing faces have established surface-adjacent nests in the ruins of the northern suburbs. But the geothermal survey teams have found something in the deep rock that they want to correlate with surface geological markers, and the council has decided that the information is worth the risk, and Rose's Northern Command will provide the escort. Rose asked me if I wanted to go. I've been underground for 8 years. I haven't seen sky, real sky, not a ventilation shaft in 8 years. I haven't felt sun. I don't know what the ruins of Johannesburg look like now, what 8 years of impact aftermath and atmospheric change and the particular entropy of an abandoned human city has done to the streets and buildings I used to walk through. I told her I'd think about it. What I'm actually doing is something slightly different from thinking. I'm sitting with the fact that the surface is where Daniel died, or where the tunnel collapsed that killed him, which is not the surface but is, in my mind, inextricably associated with the light that came from above. The last time I was moving toward daylight, I was on the wrong side of a collapse. I don't expect the surface to be what it was. I don't expect any particular feeling. I have learned over 8 years not to build anticipatory emotional structures around future events, because the underground has a way of collapsing them. But I think I'll go. I think you have to go toward the light eventually, even if the light is different now, and the sky above it isn't the sky you remember. You have to go because the alternative is staying below with your grief and your lamp and your list of names on the wall, and the names deserve more than that. They deserve to be carried upward, into whatever the world has become. Spring is 3 months away. I have 3 months to finish being afraid of it. That's enough time. Troy came to see me last week. Not for any operational reason, just to sit, which is something we do occasionally, the way old partners do when there's no particular agenda and no crisis to manage, and the silence between two people who have been in enough bad tunnels together has become its own kind of communication. He brought coffee. Terrible coffee, the grain roast substitute that Level 5 has been producing since year 3, which I have come to genuinely prefer to the memory of real coffee, which tastes, in recollection, impossibly delicate. We sat in my office. He looked at the names on the wall for a while. "You're going up," he said, not a question. "In spring, yes." He nodded. He drank his coffee. "I'll come," he said. "Your leg." "My leg goes where I go," he said. "We've had this conversation." We had, in fact, had this conversation several times, always reaching the same conclusion. I stopped raising the leg. "Rose thinks the route is manageable," I said. "The northern shaft exits into what used to be the Soweto Industrial Corridor. The wearing face density on the surface is apparently lower than we expected. They seem to prefer the subsurface, which makes sense. Better hunting grounds." "Better hunting grounds," Troy repeated. "We're the hunting grounds." "We're the hunting grounds who hold the chokepoint," I said. He looked at the wall again, at Kabu's name and the 11 others. "Do you think Daniel would have liked it down here?" he asked. "The caves, the big ones." Nobody had ever asked me that before. I sat with it for a moment. "He would have had questions," I said, "about the bioluminescence, about the geothermal vents, about why the air quality was better at 200 meters than at 20. I paused. "He would have wanted to map it. He was that kind of kid." Troy was quiet. "He would have liked Rose," I said. "He would have followed her around asking questions until she put him to work." Troy smiled. It was a specific smile, the kind that holds grief and warmth in the same expression without either one canceling the other out, which is something that takes years of practice and a willingness to let both things exist simultaneously. He'd gotten there before me. He was better at it than I was. "Spring," he said. "Spring," I agreed. He finished his coffee and left, and I sat alone in my office with the names on the wall and the distant sound of the burro going about the business of survival. And I thought about Daniel with his questions and his sardines and his 9 years. And I thought about the spring and the sky and whatever color it was now above the ruins of a city that used to be ours. And I thought, we will go up and see it. Whatever it is now, we will go up and see it. We are still capable of surprise.